I'm David Kratochvil from BQE Water, and I'm sitting here today with Chris Fleming. Thank you very much for coming and doing this with me, Chris.
It's my pleasure, David. Look forward to the chat.
The intent of doing these talks, and I want to post all of them on our website, is to help promote sharing in the industry, information
sharing. Knowledge.
Sharing knowledge,
Yeah.
sharing information, and understanding that we're in the middle of very, I think, important tectonic almost demographic shift in the industry. And, thought leaders, technical experts who've been in the industry for a long time, like yourself, are gradually coming to the end of their professional careers and exiting the industry. And I feel it's really important that, we have discussions and that we don't miss an opportunity to pass information on to the new generation that's just coming into the industry now. So that's really the context of why we're here today. Thank you very much for doing it with me.
You're welcome.
So I know that you're originally from South Africa, and I know that Africa has a very special place in your heart still. And so, before we jump into technical topics, and I just want to start by asking you a little bit about, how was it for you, growing up in South Africa at the time when you did, and your journey into the industry, I guess?
Well, I actually grew up in Zimbabwe, not in South Africa.
Okay.
Went through high school in Zimbabwe, and then when I finished high school, I went to South Africa University. There wasn't much opportunity for university in Zimbabwe. I went to Cape Town University, and I didn't really have mining or anything in my focus for my career. I did a BSc because I guess excelled more at sciences than arts at school. And I kind of gravitated into chemistry. Enjoyed my final year undergraduate chemistry, and I did quite well, so they asked me if I wanted to stay on and do honors. And I did quite well in that, and they said, well, do you want to stay on and do some research? So, yeah, that'd be great. I didn't really want to go back to Zimbabwe. Things were unraveling in Zimbabwe. They had a guerrilla war going on, and I didn't see much future for myself. So I kind of, by accident, got into research, and while I was doing my PhD, I got a bursary from a mining company. So I kind of stumbled into mining, and
Which mining company was it?
well, it was actually a state research organization called Mintech.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed what I was doing at Mintech, and never left the mining industry. And what I really liked about my time there, my research, was they were very well connected with industry. Okay. It was a semi-state organization. By that the state basically undertook to cover all our operating expenses. But they encouraged us to earn as much money as we could from the mining industry, so there was always a good connection with the mining industry. And the mining industry could get fairly inexpensive research done because the state was underpinning our salaries. But it was just a fantastic environment to do research that was relevant, but also quite fundamental. So we covered all the bases, and because of that, it attracted very bright people, because the mentoring process was fantastic there.
Oh,
and I think that's something we've lost a little bit now. We don't have these kind of state organizations functioning like they used to. And I think that's a great pity. You just don't get that kind of knowledge at university. Mm-hmm. You can get the fundamental knowledge, but you can't get the practical knowledge. And so I was 16 years at Mintech, and those were great times. And in fact, I developed a lot of what I know now today while I was at Mintech. A lot of my expertise was in gold processing. And once again, almost by accident, I ended up getting an invitation to come and live in Canada because of my expertise in gold processing. So nothing really has been strategic in my career. I've kind of fell into things by being in the right place at the right time. As far as the gold processing was concerned, I'd come over to Canada in 1988. I'd been part of a team that developed the carbon and pulp process, and had become a bit of a spokesman for the process because I like talking and I like going to conferences.
So just to clarify, I saw, a couple of papers published around carbon. I remember the first one that I ever saw on carbon was like 1979 or something. So you were in South Africa still then, working for Mintech, and were you part of the group that was doing all the piloting and all that? Like, okay.
Yeah, so what happened with the carbon and pulp process, it was quite well known before we really got involved with it in South Africa. It wasn't well published, but there were a couple of plants operating in the United States using the process. The US Bureau of Mines had done quite a lot of development work. And we started doing some work in the sort of mid 1970s at Mintech, and found the work that had been done in the States was very highly focused on slimes treatment. Slimes which are very difficult to filter because the traditional gold process up to then involved solid liquid separation. And if you had a lot of slimes, it was really difficult to process through
So we're talking
filters.
Merrill-Crowe, or?
Yeah, so what they would do would be a sand slime split, and the sands would go to filters and Merrill-Crowe, and the slimes would go to carbon and pulp. So it was they were very small, the plants. There were just 2 or 3 in the States, and they were just treating slimes. The work that our engineering group in Mintech did really demonstrated that the process could be applied right across the board. You didn't have to do the sand slime split, you could process anything. And they also started processing anything from whole ore to reclaimed dumps to old tailings that were being reclaimed for gold and uranium. I mean, there were probably 5 or 6 different applications we looked at in those first few years, and ran pilot plants. So our engineering group was showing that the process worked really well on all the different feeds that were put through their pilot plant. But no one, including the US Bureau of Mines, really knew why the process worked so well. They didn't understand the fundamentals.
Okay.
And that's when I got involved. So I did a lot of my research on the mechanism by which gold was loading. There was a quite widely held belief at that time that gold was reduced to gold metal on the activated carbon. And I quickly proved that that wasn't happening. In fact, thermodynamically, it was impossible that it was loading as gold cyanide. But apart from the mechanism, I also did modeling studies to try and figure out how best to optimize the process. So that was my role in this team with the engineering group. And as I said, I became a bit of a spokesman for the overall process. And in that light, I was invited by the CIM to a conference they had in Winnipeg in 1988. And the focus of the conference was on gold metallurgy. And I actually gave a paper in the conference. Sort of ran from Monday to Wednesday, but on the Saturday and Sunday of that conference, they had a short course on the carbon and pulp process, and I delivered that course. And 2 or 3 of the organizers of that conference were from Lakefield Research. So they figured that they would quite like to have me on the staff and sort of leapfrog into this gold processing area. So I got my first invitation from a headhunter in Toronto a few months after that conference. And yeah, one thing led to another. And in 1990, it was 2 years later, we immigrated to Canada. So, and yeah, also, the timing was almost serendipitously perfect, because doors were starting to close in South Africa for political reasons. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought everything was opening up politically, but in fact, for people like myself, doors were closing. Whereas so many opportunities opened up when I got to Canada.
Okay. So. You mentioned it was close to the industry, but it was state funded.
Partially, yeah.
Partially. So how does an organization that's kind of semi-state, how did it manage itself, or how did it make itself into an organization that would be so good at mentoring people?
I don't think that was ever the intention of the state. I mean, they basically, as I said, they just undertook to support Mintech and make sure that it interacted closely with industry. But some years that support might have been 70 or 80% of our operating budget. So it was a very significant contribution. But I think what was key was, because of that support, we were able to do quite a lot of fundamental research. We didn't have to go out there and hustle for every rand that we earned. So it really attracted people who liked doing fundamental research. But there was this 20 or 30% that was coming from industry, so it couldn't be blue sky. It had to be fairly directed. And the other thing was that a lot of our research was done by a collaborative effort from the mining industry. It was called the Chamber of Mines in South Africa. And there were 5 or 6 major mining companies and a bunch of smaller mining companies who contributed to a budget that went to getting research done. And because of that, you couldn't really patent anything. It was information that was freely available to all the mining companies and through them to the rest of the world. So that had also encouraged sharing of information and with each other, as well as with whoever really wanted to know about it. And in the years after we put in the first couple of carbon and pulp plants in South Africa, it just took off in Australia and Canada and the United States. And we at Mintech were encouraged to go over and give courses in Australia and Canada to make sure that they were doing it properly. So I think that the 2 aspects: one, we were encouraged to do fundamental research, and 2, the mining industry collaborated and put their heads together to make sure that all the information was shared equally amongst them and then through them to the rest of the world.
Okay.
I think that was what was key.
Fascinating, because as you know, these days that sharing is it's a very different story now. And in terms of the impact of, let's say, the carbon absorption goal in the gold industry, would you say that it was a major step change, like not an incremental improvement over Merrill-Crowe, but fundamentally a step change in the way of doing business?
Absolutely. I mean, the Merrill-Crowe process came in at the turn of the century, and there'd been very little change over 80 years. Mm-hmm. The mining industry gold mining industry was extremely conservative. They had a process that worked well. Don't mess with us. And in a very short period of time, from about, I think we put in the first big carbon and pulp plant in 1981 in South Africa, and by about 1990 or the early 1990s, about 80% of the gold mining industry worldwide had gone from Merrill-Crowe to carbon and pulp. So in the space of less than 15 years, for an industry that was very conservative and resistant to change,
it's amazing.
That was more than a step change. That was explosive, and they're very exciting times. I mean,
yeah,
the carbon and pulp process itself got such rapid acceptance because it was so robust. You didn't really need to understand it that well for it to work well. If you understood it well, you could make incremental improvements, but you could be pretty ignorant and still run a really good CIP plant.
Okay.
And I think that was also really important. I've done work on other processes where you really needed to understand the chemistry, and you had to have a smart chemical engineer on board to make it work. Uh-huh. And that kind of change hasn't really stuck in the industry. They like things to be simple. I'm talking about the gold industry. They'd been spoiled by the Merrill-Crowe process, which itself was a very robust process.
Uh-huh. And just out of curiosity, and again, more for context, my understanding is that really, at that time, it could have gone either way, carbon or resin. But it went carbon way. And my understanding is that maybe in Russia they went to resin for reasons that they didn't have access to the right type of carbon. But maybe you can elaborate on that. And why do you think that it went to carbon as opposed to resin?
I was very involved because once I'd sort of done what I thought I could do with carbon, I got onto resins. And resins were way more interesting for me. And we developed processes that were a little bit better than carbon. But
Okay.
that's the key. They're only a little bit better. And by the time we were ready to roll that out, the industry had accepted carbon in South Africa and in Canada and Australia. So once again, once something is working well, don't mess with it. So that was the philosophy. And there are some exceptions. There are a couple of resin plants around the world, the Western world, that are running really well. So there were some plants that went resin rather than carbon, but very few compared to carbon.
By the way, which plants would be using resin?
The ones that use resin are mostly where the ore is very preg-robbing.
Okay.
You can.
Right.
One of the ways of dealing with preg-robbing is to add a blinding agent like kerosene, and that's bad news for carbon, but it has no effect on resin. So, so that's really the situations where resins have found a place. In Russia, I mean, all of the activated carbon came from the Western world. Most of it was made in countries near the equator where you grow coconuts. Indonesia, Philippines, places like that. So the Russians didn't have access to activated carbon, and I think they were quite restricted as far as trade with the world markets was concerned. But they did know how to make their own resins. They'd made their own resins for uranium.
Right.
And basically the same resins worked for gold. So that was the reason. They had resins available, and they made resin and pulp technology work.
So when you said that, resin could do a bit better than carbon, but the problem was only a bit better, in what way would it be better?
Well, mainly the kinetics were very much faster. The kinetics were such that in each stage of a resin and pulp plant, you come to equilibrium within an hour or less. With carbon, you never really come to equilibrium. Okay. And the residence time of carbon at each stage can be anything up to a few days. So the carbon sits in the plant for a hang of a long time, which means you've got a big carbon inventory, a lot of gold locked up in the plant. That's the main reason. It's also a process that you can run under ambient conditions. With carbon and pulp, you need to have high temperature pressure elution, and you need to have thermal regeneration. So for remote locations where power might be very expensive, resins make more sense from an operating cost perspective.
And is there any, as with resins, there's always issues, concerns rather than issues, but a lot of people bring up concerns around fouling, irreversible fouling. So if there's anything in the process solutions that would be, catching onto onto resin that you can't possibly elute off, was there any such substance?
Yeah, there are certainly situations where resins do not perform as well as carbon. Resins are not ideal processing ores that got a lot of sulfide in them, particularly if the sulfide gets leached going into solution as thiocyanate. Thiocyanate can be dealt with, but it's difficult. It adds to the process complexity. If you've got a high concentration of ferrocyanide, also possibly through leaching of sulfides or pyrrhotite, that too is a contraindication for resin. Ferrocyanide and thiocyanate are the two real bugbears in resin processing.
Okay.
As I say, they can be dealt with, but it's an added layer of complexity that the gold mining industry does not need.
Okay. This is a nice actually segue into, one of the topics I wanted to chat with you about is in fact, the whole issue of thiocyanate and I guess generally, at least based on whatever my relatively short career in the industry has been compared to yours, I see that there's definitely more and more what I would say complex ore bodies being developed, and the flow sheets are getting more complicated, and and the sulfur species, the thiocyanates and thiosalts of various sorts are really popping up in these process waters, and we of course at BQE Water deal with the water side, but working not just on the environmental side, but now talking about cleaning up solutions for reuse even within the circuits, we come across that more often. So what is that your sense too, that the industry is developing more and more complex ore bodies, or is that a general trend that I'm not making up myself, but you perceive it true?
It's certainly true of the gold industry, which I've stayed close to. Ores are getting more complex. Whether it's with gold locked up in sulfides, you have to oxidize the sulfides to liberate the gold, or whether you've got naturally occurring carbonaceous matter that adds another layer of refractoriness. And they're also getting lower grade, so you're less and less able to deal with process complexity. It's a fact of life for gold processing, and I suspect it is for most other metals as well. I mean, the reality is all the easily mineable ores have been found. Those old prospectors were pretty smart. They knew where to look, and we're only really finding new ore bodies now because of quite sophisticated exploration technology, satellite imaging and stuff like that. But what it means is they're generally deeper under the Earth's crust, and that brings in a complexity in almost every case. So either it's mining costs or mineralogical complexity. So the industry, I think it's in a bit of a crisis as its ore bodies are getting lower grade, more complex, and I think there's a bit of a dearth of good experienced people coming up through the ranks. You've probably experienced that yourself. For young people going to university now, there just seem to be so many other sexier professions to chase than engineering.
Yeah, it's true, but at the same time, I do feel that there is a rebirth in a sense for the industry being really, I mean, just the recognition that we do need the minerals that we need for, living in the modern world and decarbonizing, and I think that message has certainly created more interest in the whole field. But yeah, I think the context of the understanding of what the mining industry traditionally was mining and processing and where it's heading now, is the interesting point where, for every new thing that pops up, obviously people are trying to work around it. But so have you? Do you feel that the industry has the right answers to? Okay, well, we just need to pre-oxidize the ore, or we just need to bio-oxidize it, or, are there answers, or do you feel that with each answer we're creating another problem, or is it?
Well, we're getting back to gold ores again. Finding a way to get the gold out of these refractory ores without oxidizing the sulfides is the holy grail of the industry. But I'm not confident that anyone is going to find that holy grail. I really think you have to oxidize the sulfides, and it's expensive. So you need a certain concentration of gold in the sulfide to cover those costs and to make money at the end of the day. So the only long-term answer to that is that the gold price is going to have to go up a hang of a lot to treat ore bodies in the future.
Right.
So yeah, that is the fundamental problem that the gold miner faces, is declining grades, increasing complexity, and a gold price that's been pretty static for a long time now.
Right. There's definitely quality to gold, I suppose, that certainly with
It's just just for me, what's interesting is the impact of the gold mining industry is minimal. I think we're mining about 3,000 or 4,000 tons of gold a year, and it's estimated that there's about 250,000 tons of gold in inventory above ground. Right. It's a lot easier to get that gold out of a bank vault or from a jeweler than it is to dig it out of ground that's carrying 1 gram per ton of gold. Right. So that 250,000 ton flywheel could keep, everyone who wants jewelry going for until kingdom comes. So, but still, we have this desire to keep making that flywheel bigger and bigger every year. And at the end of the day, what for? It's not that the world's going to stop if we stop mining gold.
What's fascinating for me was the whole, how cyanide really changed the efficiency with which you are able to actually extract gold. And what do you know when cyanide was actually first, introduced?
Well, in the 1890s, so late 1890s, round about the time that the Merrill-Crowe process was developed.
Okay.
They had a crack at hydrometallurgy with chloride and chlorine before cyanide, and that worked too. But it was expensive. It was also very non-selective. Like chlorine oxidized everything, and it was also more dangerous than cyanide. You wouldn't believe it. But
no, it's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Wow.
So once the cyanidation process was developed, it rather like carbon and pulp, 80 years later, it just took over the industry.
Wow. Okay.
In fact, up until the development of the cyanidation process, there was very little whole ore mining. There would be gravity circuits and things like that, and then you would amalgamate the gravity concentrate.
Right.
But whole ore mining came into its own with the development of the cyanidation process.
And so, talking about lixiviants for gold, then do you feel that the thiosulfate process has legs to become the step change in the industry, or is it just not?
No. There is just the one application where thiosulfate can yield better results than cyanide, and that's if you've got a preg-robbing ore, because the gold thiosulfate complex does not load onto activated carbon, it doesn't load onto preg-robbing carbon. So in those situations, you can get better recovery. The thermodynamics are not great though. And one of the advantages of cyanide is that it is a very robust process and the kinetics are quite fast, considering that the gold is being oxidized by oxygen with a very low concentration in solution. In order for the thiosulfate process to compete with cyanide on a level playing field, the gold needs to be extremely fine. It's almost submicroscopic, which it is if you've oxidized sulfides. Usually the gold that's locked in sulfides is extremely fine. So then you can get good kinetics, and the same sort of order of magnitude as the cyanidation process, 24 hours leaching. But if you take a normal run-of-mill gold ore, kinetics are very slow. And what that means is that the thiosulfate leach chemistry is also unstable. Thiosulfate decomposes with time.
Of course, yeah.
And as it decomposes, it produces byproducts, sulfur byproducts that can actually reprecipitate the gold. So gold recovery goes through a maximum. And to try and hit that maximum in a processing plant, as you can imagine, is a bit of a nightmare. The other problem is that the sort of accepted way of recovering gold from a thiosulfate leach solution is with resins, because it's an anionic complex with anion exchange resins. The other problem with thiosulfate decomposition is that it produces byproducts, tetrathionate, trithionate, that compete with gold for loading on the resin. So the gold loading on the resin also goes through a peak and comes down. It's a very difficult process to optimize for a run-of-mine type gold, where your particles are 50 microns and up. But if it's down less than 10 microns, you've got a hope.
Okay.
But
just because of the kinetics.
Yeah, because of the kinetics and the instability of the chemistry.
Right.
I mean, the process that's operating at Goldstrike now, we did all the development work for that. They've got a total leach time of 6 hours. So the kinetics are very fast, but that is less than 1 micron size gold particles.
Right.
That's what you need. And I guess that's a long way around of saying that thiosulfate is not going to replace cyanide, except for very specific applications. And I mentioned the one, it's when you've recovered gold by oxidizing sulfides, and the gold is very fine, and you have to have preg-robbing as well.
Right.
So I I mean, one of Barrick's concerns before they put in the gold strike process was that the environmental lobby would say, there's an alternative. Let's shut down the cyanidation process.
Okay.
But in reality, at the time we did the work for Barrick, they gave us every other ore that they were either mining or looking at on the exploration side, and none of them came close to cyanide.
Oh, wow.
So they realized that they had a very unique situation at Goldstrike.
Okay. When it comes to cyanide, one other topic that I wanted to hit with you during this discussion is that whole topic of cyanide recycling, and obviously we're very grateful to you to invent the SART process and make it actually publicly available. Which, by the way, was it when you invented SART? Was it that that whole experience from South Africa and the whole carbon open platform, open to the whole industry, is that what guided you with saying no patents for SART, it's just out there?
It was at the back of my mind. Certainly I've been involved in the development of quite a few processes.
Yeah.
And the only ones that have really taken off were those where there were no patents, and the mining industry could have it. The situation with SART was, and in fact this was after I joined Lakefield Research, and in all of the work we do for all of our clients at Lakefield Research, they've paid for the work, they have first rights to the technology if they want it. So the SART development was done for Teck. They were looking at a gold mine in Chile where there was a lot of soluble copper.
It was Lobo Marte was the first one.
Lobo Marte, yeah. And it wasn't a very high grade ore, and cyanide consumption was an issue, very major part of the operating cost. So the SART process came out of that. The SART chemistry was well known. De Gusa or metallurgist had demonstrated the chemistry in the 1950s, but they didn't know how to make it a practical process. You know, the reality of that sulfide precipitation is that you produce a very low concentration of copper sulfide, 0.1% solids or something. And in their early work, and I think they patented it, they just took this 0.1% solids and they put it into huge filters, and, you know, slimy stuff, horrible stuff. It was just a nightmare. So the genius of my process was just thicken the damn stuff. You know?
Right.
And rather than trying to do it all in a pipe reactor, do it in a proper tank, but close the tank off, keep it under, you know, slight negative pressure so you don't have worries with H2S or HCN. And it worked beautifully. It went from, I think in the Lobo Marte case, from 0.05% solids up to about 20% solids. So you just had this very small volume of thickener underflow, and it was such a small percentage of the cyanide that you could neutralize it and put it into a filter completely safely, as long as you kept the gas phase up, you know, above the reactors sealed and under negative pressure. So we made it into a very safe process. That was the T in SART, and because of that, it kind of took off in the industry, not right away, but with your help, it certainly has now.
Well, I actually remember. I remember the first time I met you in person was I think that our office was in the Marine Building, and Brad told me, he said, "Oh, Chris is going to fly in and give us this, you know, one-day rundown on SART, and we need to do this." And so I remember you flew in and sitting in the boardroom, and we discussed SART, and this was maybe 2 years before Uvia de Oro, before we built the plant. Yeah. And I guess, you know, the thing at that time, you know, I don't remember when the Lobo Marte pilot was. I believe it was early 90s, sometime early
mid-90s.
Yeah.
95.
And so when you did that, you flew into our office and we met. That was 2006, 2005. So, and if I remember correctly, between that point in time, between the Lobo Marte pilot and us meeting here, there was only one plant in Telford that was put in, right?
Now, there's a lot of interesting history there. I'll just go back to the patenting, though. So that the tech metallurgist on that project was a guy called Peter McPhail, He's quite a good friend of mine. So we worked quite closely through that project, and we came up with the acronym over a beer, the SART acronym. But so he had, or Tech had the rights to the technology if they wanted it. And so Peter spoke to his boss, and his boss said, no, we're not in the business of selling technology. So Peter and I agreed that we would write a paper, which I did, and that was sort of the first, or the seminal paper on the SART process. And once it was in the public domain, it was available to everyone. Yeah, it's a very little happened for a while. Newmont latched onto, and Newcrest latched onto it,
yes.
and they. My chemist who'd worked with me, a guy called Koen Trang, they flew him down to Perth to explain the chemistry to them, and then they went ahead and they did it all on their own. And I mean, Telfer had a very checkered history. They messed up the engineering, they didn't understand the chemistry, and they've had one problem after another. So it wasn't a really good advertisement for the process. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to speak to BQE or Biotech and Brad at that time because I saw such a good fit. I mean, the keys for me with the SART process was the engineering. The chemistry I knew was going to be dead easy. The engineering, you needed to do two things. You needed to be able to handle toxic gases, and you need to be able to handle very fine sulfide precipitates. And with your sulfics, I mean your copper 2 sulfide process, mm-hmm. You had the basic skill set, so it was just a logical fit for me, and I think history's proved me right there. Yeah. You guys have built the plants on spec, on budget, on time, and the darn things operate every time, whereas everyone else who's trying to build a plant has had nightmares.
We're extremely grateful that, I'm very grateful for the connection that Brad made and the decision that we made to really put our heads together and collaborate in this sense. I'd say though that there's always, it never ceases to amaze me that from every plan that we build, we always learn something new, yeah. I mean, I don't know whether going back to the example with the carbon, when you said, well, it took off so quickly that within 8 years, everybody was running carbon. There probably were no disasters, I guess. There was no one built a plant that didn't work. Yeah. But, I can't stress enough how we learn from every single one of these installations. Absolutely. Something new that we didn't know about. Sometimes even on the chemistry side, we're surprised. But generally, as you say, it's one of those things that the process is actually quite robust, mm-hmm. and it can run quite well. So. Yeah, major contribution for sure to the gold mining industry there. On the topic of cyanide recycle, I remember also you worked on the HANA process, mm-hmm. and understanding the limitations of SART being applied on solutions and being thereby limited also in, the ideal scenario is heap leach, but if you want to try to put it into combination with the CIP circuit where you have, a limited opportunity to recycle solutions, mm-hmm. You may be limited. The HANA process seemed to be the answer to it. And whatever happened to it?
Well, I guess the HANA process had two issues. One was all of the work that we did was paid for by DuPont. Okay. And DuPont wanted to own the technology, and they wanted to patent it, and they wanted the technology because they're vendors of cyanide, and they believed it could improve their market position as cyanide salesmen. So patenting it was an issue. The other real problem with the HANA process is that it is complex. We've spoken about that. The chemistry, we've demonstrated the chemistry, it's very elegant, but it's complex. Mm. So you don't just need a chemical engineer on your staff, you need a smart chemical engineer on your staff. And it was a tough sell. I mean, Barrick did a lot of work with us on their Bullion Hulu project because that would have been a real beneficiary. Marcus Tomlinson, you know him, okay. He was their engineer on the job. And Barrick, having spent quite a lot of money, walked away from it in the end because they just thought it was too complex. Uh-huh. Definitely for Tanzania, it was too complex. So that is, well, those are the two reasons why the HANA process hasn't taken off.
But is it, I believe that one got patented. Is it Barrick owns the patents, or is it?
No, DuPont owned the patents.
DuPont, okay.
Yeah.
It's surprising that DuPont making cyanide would be interested in investing in cyanide recycling technology instead of
They
selling
weren't really. I mean, and they also didn't really have the people to drive the technology. Just seemed like a nice idea, I think. But
interesting. Okay. And while we're on the topic of cyanide recycling, obviously we should mention the AVR process. And as far as I know, okay, so again, very simple chemistry, but not very many applications out there in the industry. And at least in the Western world, I was not aware of any long-term successful operation that would be running for years and years until we started introducing SART in China. And as you know, we built a couple of plants in China with SART to replace an AVR. So
Right.
Here we go to these Chinese mills, and looking around, it's like, what is this? This is an AVR. And so I guess all of those Chinese plants are relatively small. I mean, they feed them, some of them are 50 tons a day, 150 tons a day, small metallurgical circuits. So the AVR is doable in a small scale. But if you have a larger flow, it becomes an issue. I suppose power draws. But any thoughts from your end on why the AVR hasn't really taken off as much?
We've been involved in a few AVR projects, and I've got a pretty good idea why it hasn't taken off. Firstly, it really only recovers free cyanide.
Right.
If you were to try and recover copper from cyanide from copper cyanide, you're basically getting back to salt. So it really only recovers free cyanide, and most gold mines can run their free cyanide down to a pretty low level at the end of the leaching process, so the economics just aren't there. The second reason is it's very energy intensive. HCN is very soluble, so you've got to belt a lot of air through that stripping tower to get the HCN out. And then the third reason is you have to recover the HCN in caustic. People have tried to make it work with lime, but everything just gets so bogged up with gypsum that they've had to close it down. And that's obviously benefit of SART is that you can neutralize with lime and much lower cost. So I think those are the reasons. But the big one is where the SART opportunities are occurring now is where you have high cyanide consumption due to the formation of copper cyanide, and AVR can't handle that.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't know if you're aware of the latest, I guess, development that is being introduced by Corem for thiocyanate, where they actually run an AVR, and then they run, I believe, ozonation on the acidified, under acidic conditions, and to tackle the thiocyanate. But have you heard of any developments on that front, or no?
No,
Okay.
no, I haven't. But I mean, it makes sense if you've got a high concentration of thiocyanate. The economics of oxidizing thiocyanate only really makes sense if you recover the cyanide.
Right.
And whether you use an oxidant or whether you use electrochemistry to oxidize the thiocyanate, I believe you need to do it at a mine site so that you can recycle the cyanide directly into the process.
Yeah.
And then the value of your recovered cyanide comes close to the cost of oxidizing the thiocyanate.
Right.
Maybe you get a little bit of free cyanide, but not much. Free, no cost. But because of that, people haven't dealt with thiocyanate, certainly in the Western world. In Russia and the Eastern countries, they regulate thiocyanate and they have to deal with it. And it's pretty expensive.
Right.
It's a 6-electron or whatever process to oxidize thiocyanate. So it's costly, and you can you can mitigate those costs if you recover the cyanide. So I don't think there's anything, I don't know much about it, but I don't think there's anything unique that Corem is doing. Certainly putting in an AVR plant and making a high cyanide concentration allows you to recycle the cyanide into a milling process rather than a heap leach. But
yeah. But as far as the ozone part of it, so you're probably aware of the fact that we've been working on electro-oxidation, which works really well. If you have high concentration of thiocyanates, it's really quite efficient. But we haven't used ozone, in our studies, and I don't know. Have you, in general? It's all about, I guess, cost. At the end, the electrons have to come from somewhere. Is it electricity? Is it ozone? And then, if you turn electrons into ozone and then use ozone to do something else. But have you used ozone in general in any other work, metallurgical work?
We've done a bit of that sort of work, oxidizing thiocyanate. I think we have done other work too. We've got an ozone generator in Lakefield. Another problem is you need to have a good source of oxygen because it's a very inefficient process when you use air.
Air, right.
So you've got the cost of oxygen, you've got the cost of electricity. I certainly prefer just doing straight electro oxidation like you're doing. This guy, Koen Trang, I told you about, who Newcrest asked to come out to Australia. He actually did his MSc thesis at Queen's in Kingston, and he did that process exactly, and he looked at both ozone and electrochemistry.
Okay.
So it's an MSc thesis. I guess it's in the public domain if anyone wants it. But that was the first work I saw actually published on recovering cyanide from thiocyanate. And I think back then he did some fairly basic economics, and there wasn't much in it whether you used ozone or electricity.
Okay. That's good. I'll probably look it up. I know actually how to spell his name because I believe his name was on the lab report for the first SART tests on UV Adoro. So I'll look it up.
He was the first guy I hired into my hydrometallurgy group when I started in Lakefield. He was a chemist in our analytical group, and I saw his resume and thought he was being wasted there. So,
being mindful of time, we're closing up to an hour almost. I guess we talked mostly about gold, but I guess through Lakefield, your professional career, you've obviously grown outside of gold and been exposed to many other metallurgical processes. I guess I have a couple of questions. One is really about your view of, do you feel there are early developments, technological developments, or maybe there are already some that are not that early stage that would be sort of akin to a step change like the carbon technology, not in gold, but like in general in extraction of any other metals and anything that would actually fundamentally help the mining industry improve efficiency and fundamentally change the way that the business is done. Do you think there is anything in the any cooks in the kitchen preparing new things?
Mineral processing, the holy grail there is to find a more efficient way of breaking rocks. And milling processes are so inefficient. And there too, as you dig deeper, the rocks tend to get harder. We're finding more and more ore deposits with work indices over 20. So milling is a big incremental, big component of operating costs in any mine. And I don't know what the energy efficiency is, but it's probably around 10 or 15%. It's a huge wastage of energy in milling. So, I mean, that's the only place where I could see a step change. There will always be little incremental improvements in flotation equipment, particularly. I think the work that's being done on Jameson cells and Woodgrove cells is very important, because what's happened with these low-grade ores, they just got to bigger and bigger tonnages. mining 1 million tons a day of bloody crap, you know, to get 0.2% copper out of it. And what's happened with the conventional cells like Outokumpu, they've just got bigger and bigger and less and less efficient. They've got huge dead zones in them. So what Jameson cells and Woodgrove cells do is they try and bring that all down to. So there I think big improvements being made in flotation technology.
Would there be anything in, you know, now in the lithium world, you know, this whole direct lithium extraction, or, you know, has Lakefield done any work on any of these direct lithium extraction technologies, or?
We're doing a lot of work on lithium at the moment, and it's coming from two sources: the lithium silicates, where you really have to do sulfation roast or something like that before you can go to hydrometallurgy, or the salts, you know, from the salars. Yeah. Obviously those are easier to process, but the concentrations tend to be lower. We've had quite a lot of success with mineral processing, upgrading of the silicates, getting them from typically 0.5 to 1% in the ground up to between 4 and 6%, which then has to go to a sulfuric acid bake or roast. So there's been quite a lot of development on that side, on the flotation side.
But as far as like a direct lithium extraction from the low-grade brine, so the extreme of the Chilean brines or some of the Argentinian brines, you know, they're quite concentrated. But you know, the people are trying to work on streams, you know, that are way lower in concentrations, you know, tens of ppms or you know, low hundreds of ppms of lithium, and upgrading them. And you know, they talk about direct lithium extraction being some kind of ion exchange. So with, you know, your background and knowledge about ion exchange and my personal interest in ion exchange, I always wondered about what kind of materials would those direct lithium extraction resins be. Probably not organic, would they be? Yeah.
I really don't know. It's tricky. I mean, we've probably got a lot of sodium and potassium and other monovalent cations in there. So you're probably not going to get much selectivity from a cation exchange resin or solvent. You're going to have to get something that's more size specific, I would think. But no, I don't know.
Okay.
Out of my field.
Great. So anything else you would want to share, pass on? Anything where you're reflecting on your, you know, life, career in the industry? Anything that you would like to?
Well, just to go back to where we started, I think we really have lost something in the 40-year span of my career, in that no one really who's doing fundamental search that has a practical outcome. No one, because all of the big state organizations like the US Bureau of Mines, CanMet, even CSIRO in Australia, have got away from funding any portion of the work. It all has to be paid for by a mining company, and mining companies want their results for them, not for anyone else. So you really need that state-funded component in order to make it more generally available to the world at whole. Universities are also, you know, to pay for their professor chair, you know, they have to do what the mining company wants done, and the mining company owns it. So we've really lost something. Organizations like yours are doing fundamental research towards a practical outcome, but you have to have, you know, the budget. You have to be able to budget for that properly, and you can't do too much of it because it'll blow your financial performance out of the water. So that's a fact of life right now, and the mining industry, I believe, is impoverished because of it. I don't think the governments who are funding this type of research appreciated how valuable it was.
And on the training side, the new professionals coming into the field, and the training side, do you feel like, I don't know, maybe in your recent experiences from SGS, from Lakefield, do you feel like academically the young generation entering the industry is academically fine, trained just right. They just need some guidance here and there, or do you feel like we've actually missed something in the academic training too?
I can't criticize their university training. I mean, they're no more naive than I was when I left university, but they really do need on-the-job training and good mentoring from their colleagues. I mean, I've really encouraged that at Lakefield. We have quite regular group discussions where different engineers will present whatever their topic is and get feedback from everyone else. I don't know how widely that's happening, but that's the big step after university.
Okay.
University just teaches you so much, but you really learn more out there at the pit face.
Well, thanks again, Chris, for doing this with me. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else listening to this will enjoy it too. Thank you.
You're welcome.